Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 26th of September 2025. And it's one of those days where you wake up and you realise you're 49 and not 48. And you realise you've got a few more cards in the post than you usually would. So appreciate those people who are still bothered to say happy birthday. So thank you to relatives, really. I am wearing an old birthday t-shirt from a millennium ago. Jonathan, the man, the myth, the legend of the multiverse, as we all know. So it is one of those days. 49 years young. I had a tough, very tough paper round when I was young, and it has scarred me in looking older than I should. Anyway, do we have a birthday present from the Ukrainians in terms of what they got up to in the last 24 hours? I'm not so sure. I think it's on balance been probably a better night for the Ukrainians than for the Russians in distant strikes, but we shall see. That's yesterday's list. There, that's a good start. That's a proper one. 940 personnel lost, 2 tanks, no troop-carrying airfields, only 14 artillery systems, that's well below where we normally see it, no MLRS, no anti-aircraft warfare systems, no special equipment, and 82 vehicles and fuel tanks. So really a very quiet day for the Ukrainians in terms of what losses the Russians have taken. What does that suggest? Are there other variables at play here, like weather, for example? It's something I often forget to factor in. If there's a lot of wind, a lot of rain, that can affect movement, but also drone activity. But anyway, those are the stats for the last 24 hours. Okay, what other nuggets can we throw in? We hear from the Kyiv Independent that Russian commanders are telling troops, yet again, not for the first time, to open fire on retreating soldiers, according to an intercepted piece of comms. Quote, just shoot them. Ukraine's military intelligence said the recording captured a conversation in Donetsk Oblast in which the commander demanded that troops stand their ground at all costs. So you are not allowed to retreat, and if you do, you'll get shot by barrier troops. Now, this has been an issue for the Russians since the beginning of the war, really, but certainly since Wagner were prevalent in the Bakhmut area. We started hearing about barrier troops shooting any retreating comrades. Russian propagandist Solovyov warns that Ukraine is prepping for a major offensive. So we hear these rumors about Russia doing the same, claiming the West could supply all the equipment needed and that Ukraine has no shortage of manpower. He then pivots to suggest Russia should consider weapons the West believes it would never use. Red lines. So is this an indication that there is an acceptance among the Russian public that things aren't going so well in the war? An FPV drone strike, says no reports, hit a car in the chief of staff of Russia's 128th Motorized Rifle Brigade in Belgorod. The chief of staff was wounded, his deputy for logistics critically injured, one sergeant was killed and another left in a grave condition, targeted on the road between Titovka and Arkhangelskoye. So that is a pretty good hit for the Ukrainians there, possibly purposefully targeting high-value personnel, but maybe just it's a vehicle on the road that is a military vehicle and it wasn't purposefully targeted for the people inside, but nonetheless good news for the Ukrainians. Now, this is a topic I am fascinated by, and I'd love to know more details on what drives Russian volunteers who fight for the Russian Volunteer Corps, the Free Russia Legion, and these units that are full of Russians who have basically turned coat. Here is a story of Billy. What is the rationale? What goes on? What's the psychology involved? This is Billy, a former Wagner mercenary. He now leads an assault unit in the Russian Volunteer Corps fighting for Ukraine. So there's one thing to recognize that Russia is doing the wrong thing. And there's another thing to start shooting your own citizens effectively, or your own national comrades. You can understand what they're doing is wrong, but then fighting for the other side, there's an interest. I would like to think, well, what would I do? Would I say, right, I'm not going to fight and I will try and take political asylum in another country? Or is it a case of I've been captured? In this case, I've been captured. I don't want to be exchanged because I'll just be sent back to the front line, and it was hell. And so I might as well fight for these guys where the conditions are much better. But then I am shooting fellow Russians, and even though I know what they're doing is wrong, but actually they were people like me before, and many of them won't want to be in those situations. So yeah, interesting. Anyway, Billy, a former Wagner mercenary, now leads an assault unit in the Russian volunteer corps, the RDK, fighting for Ukraine. After refusing a prisoner exchange in 2023, he joined RDK. In March 2024, they entered Belgorod and Kursk. Recently, his group captured 16 Russian soldiers, which is wow. Incredible story. So lots of these stories, I'm sure, will emerge after the war as we find out, what motivated people. Now, we've got some claims from Syrskyi. In fact, here's another one over here. I don't know if we're going to hear the same in the thread. Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, in under 2 months, he said, in under 2 months, 85 critical enemy sites have been hit, including 33 bases, depots, arsenals, airfields, and parked aircraft. He announced a new Air Force branch dedicated to drone-based air defense. Highlighted combat helicopters now intercept up to 40% of drones. Wow. So that is pretty significant. When you see those drones getting taken down, those Shahed and Gerber drones getting taken down, 40% of them intercepted by helicopters. I told you that they are a decent way of taking them down. I don't know how cost effective they are compared to interceptor drones and compared to air defense. I presume they're going to be cheaper than air defense, but they are costly to have a helicopter up in the air for I don't know how many hours. But then that against the cost of having a drone slam into whatever it is they're targeting, it's a cost that you have to take. A new type of troops is being created in the Air Force, unmanned air defense systems, says Syrskyi. The length of the active front is almost 1,250 kilometers now. Over the year, the front line has increased by 200 kilometers. There are 2,400 kilometers where there are no battles, but our troops should also be there. The enemy uses approximately twice as many artillery shells. Wow, so it's a 2-to-1. Remember, that was different claims, maybe 10-to-1, maybe less, but 2-to-1. That's not too bad, all things considered. But the armed forces of Ukraine compensates for this with accuracy of strikes and reconnaissance. The Russians have changed tactics. They use small assault groups of 4 to 6 people to penetrate deep into the territory. The liberated territory is 168 square kilometers. About 182 square kilometers have been cleared of sabotage groups. In total, about 360 square kilometers have already been liberated. The enemy abandoned the offensive at Novopavlivska and transferred the Marines to the Zaporizhzhia direction. Interesting. Novopavlivska is south of Donetsk, it's a South Donetsk area, I guess. If I'm correct in saying that's south of Pokrovsk, and that's where the Russians are doing really well. So if they're saying the Russians are moving troops from there to Zaporizhzhia, interesting. Every day in the Zaporizhzhia direction, the defense forces destroyed 200 or more enemy servicemen. In less than 2 months, 85, as we heard, 85 important enemy facilities were hit, 33 military targets, 52 military industrial complex facilities. The number of combat helicopters that effectively fight drones is increasing, sometimes up to 40% of drones shot down in areas, depending on the weather. The concept of reforming the armed forces of Ukraine during the war provides for a transition to a core system. Now, actually, weather being also important in these stats, so the interception of Shaheds is something I have forgotten to mention. When we see low interception rates, I often conclude that it's a case of them being used near the front line, which is also true, right? But it could also be weather, meaning it's very difficult to intercept them. If it's very windy, you're not going to get helicopters up there. But then again, I wonder how drones are affected by really heavy weather as well. The Shaheds themselves. Okay. It's interesting that Jakub Janovsky also noted in his in one of his posts just now that he's added one times donkey captured. But anyway, I showed you that the other day at the end of the video. So this is the Ukrainian losses, only 7. Does that mean they're not attacking as much? The Russians are losing 26. So that's a good 3, up to almost 4 times the losses. I've been saying recently it's not like the worst thing in the world that the Ukrainians are losing more because it means they're attacking, but if they're losing less, does it mean they're not attacking? So anyway, the inverse might be true. T-64, an unknown tank, so a couple of tanks, some mobility vehicles, and a truck, and a digger there. So nothing really too bad in the loss list for the Ukrainians. For the Russians, we've got 4 tanks destroyed. We have MTLBs and BMPs and BTRs, Tiger M's, so those are some mobility and APCs and whatnot. Turret artillery. Then we're getting onto some seriously high value equipment here that's not good for the Russians. We've got a Panzer S1 destroyed. I showed you a satellite image of that yesterday. That's probably that one. Then we have 2 destroyed transporter, launcher, and radars for the Tor M2. And yeah, that's bad news. I showed you the video of them too. And then we have a Su-34 strike aircraft destroyed. Interesting, because I've not seen the evidence of that. So although the Russians have kind of admitted it through fighter bomber and other people, I've not seen the evidence. So interesting that he's included that. 2 AN-26 transport aircraft. Yep, that's fine. And then some trucks and whatnot. So definitely a worse list for the Russians. Now, I told you that the Su-34 was taken down on an attack to Zaporizhzhia, and lo and behold, within 24 hours, you had the Russians releasing this video. You don't know whether this is one they've just kept lined up, ready to release at a particularly uncomfortable moment for them. This is something they do. I try and look at the foliage, and here you've got, that looks like freshly ploughed land that I wouldn't expect to see that at the end. You know, that's not September looking land to me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, they're saying that, and this is Aiden, which is a very Russian source, saying this is an Iskander cluster munition strike on a Patriot Systems ATPGEO-65 radar in the Zaporizhzhia region, likely the system that aided the downing of the Su-34. And you're probably going to get I don't know, people saying it's a decoy, cope, blah, blah, blah. Most likely it's typical Zaporizhzhia fields. Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's September fields. So, yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. So it could be that the Russians straight away were looking for equipment that was involved in the striking down of that Su-34, and then have found something and have taken it out. I think with the Patriots, you don't have to have the radar close to the launcher. I forget how far away they can be, but here, you know, it's not like they're all in a circle in some kind of battery. You can have them a number of kilometers away, the radar from the launcher, but nonetheless claims that is taking out of a Patriot radar. Then we hear this. This is really good, nice and short Chris Wiki thread. So Russia appears to be running out of surface-to-air missiles. So that's the missiles, not so much a launcher, although we've seen a number of things taken out. Remember, there were, 4 air defense listed, taken out 2 days ago on the loss list. We've seen Books, we've seen Tours, we've seen, and then the usual S3, you know, when they've done a really good job, S300s and 400s, particularly in places like Crimea. Russia appears to be running out of surface-to-air missiles, with air defense crews having to be reassigned to the infantry because they've got nothing to fire. He continues, a Russian military correspondent, Maxim Kalashnikov, writes that he recently met air defense specialists who have been sent to the fight in the infantry after spending the last 2 years crewing Soviet-era Buk air defense systems. Quote, professional air defense specialists in the infantry, not convicts, not drunks, not Sochi boys, in other words, not deserters from the army, but in the infantry. Someone has to serve in the infantry too, but not real air defense professionals who know the equipment inside out. So why are they in the infantry? Simply because there just aren't enough missiles for the Buk missiles. Often there are just 1 or 2 missiles for every 6 vehicles. Lately, they've been delivering missiles received from the Navy. What this means, let the experts judge, and the General Staff strategists will be held accountable for the missiles and drones falling on Russian cities That's how we fight. Kalashnikov doesn't explain why missiles are in such short supply, but the most likely explanation is that Ukraine's nightly waves of drone attacks against refineries and other targets have severely depleted Russia's stockpiles of Buk missiles. So these attacks on ammunition depots, these storage points along the chain of getting missiles from production through to depots through to the front line. But the question also remains, are they producing these missiles or enough of these missiles? If they're getting them in from naval installations, then they're in trouble. That's really good news for the Ukrainians. This is a stunning video. Right. These are Russian soldiers driving past a huge amount of destroyed armoured vehicles, which were pulled to the side of the road during the road clearance in the Donetsk region. I don't know exactly where this is, but this is 35 seconds of just incredible amounts of equipment. Just absolutely vast numbers of bits of kit that have been blown up. Military equipment predominantly. Incredible. I mean, look at it. Both sides of the road here. BMPs, some trucks there. Looks like some APCs. I'm sure there are some tanks thrown in. And then you go down, look down the side of there, you got some tanks, and they're just piled. Just vast numbers of pieces of equipment. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, I've seen plenty of roads of death and whatnot, but I don't think I've seen as much equipment as closely packed and as destroyed as that. Absolutely insane. Then we have actual footage of a Ukrainian Leopard 2A4 doing its work in Pokrovsk. So this shows you that the Russians are on the outskirts, I presume, of Pokrovsk. Here, the Leopard 2A4 is fighting on behalf of the 155th. Now, both sides have the 155th operating there. There's a 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, the Marines for the Russians that have been reconstituted 1 billion times, and they've been absolutely rinsed in pretty much everywhere they've gone. They are now fighting in the Dobropilya direction, and then in Pokrovsk area you have the French trained 155th, who were, it was a bit controversial. They had some deserters when they were training in France. They got given a load of kit but didn't get given any drones. Then they went to Ukraine and then they got sliced and diced, and kind of the part of them was sent to there, part of them was sent to there, and they weren't kept together as a whole unit. Then there were all these complaints. Then I think they were maybe drawn back together, and they've actually done, I think, a fairly decent job around Pokrovsk. But here they're fighting with a Leopard 2A4, and I'm going to just take it on. You can see it driving throughout Pokrovsk, and then it settles on this building where one presumes the Russians have some personnel hold up, and this tank just leathers it with shell after shell, as you can see here. Bang, 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 and that building takes a bit of one hell of a beating, and then it drives off. So we are seeing tanks still being utilized on the front line in particular contexts. We don't see tanks being used in much the same way as we saw at the beginning of the year. Certainly, they are a rare sight. Now, talking of tanks, Jompy here, who is someone who calculates how much deep storage equipment is remaining, has a very interesting small thread here. Something big is happening at UVZ. I'm sure UVZ is that Ultra Vagon Zavod. Literally hundreds. So this is one of the manufacturing restoring places. Literally hundreds of T-72A hulls parked outside the factory now, where there was 0 a few months ago. Looks like they're finally tackling all those stored until now unused older T-72s. Judging by the reactions, I'm not sure if people really understand the implications of this. So this isn't like, oh my goodness, they've got hundreds of tanks. This is a real worry. This is, if the Russians are indeed refurbishing T-72As, that means they have 1,000 extra tank hulls they can use in due time. So actually, this is a problem. Sorry, if it's not as if they started using BTR-60s, BRDM-2s, or MTLBs, which they haven't already really paid attention to for now. Tanks are tanks, considering they mainly use them as unarmored APCs lately. So so you can read this in two ways. So there's obviously a reaction where this is nothing to worry about because these are old tanks, and they're getting desperate in what they're bringing out. And I think that is definitely a major conclusion here, which is, I presume these are really, really old and poorly conditioned tanks. Poor conditioned tanks. They are getting out the ones that are going to take the longest to refurbish. I mean, that's what happens when you get to the bottom of the barrel, really. You're getting out the stuff that requires the longest amount of time, most amount of effort and resources to refurbish. So it's almost just not worthwhile doing it. It's worthwhile just building new ones. But because they evidently, I presume, can't build new ones to the level they need, they have to refurb these particularly manky tanks. But it does also mean that even though it's going to take longer and it'll be more costly and time consuming and resource consuming, they will have hundreds of other tanks to throw at the Ukrainians. But at some stage, there literally just won't be any deep storage stuff left. Now, Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainian railway services, are now equipping their diesel locomotives with anti-drone protection. So you can see here in this video the train with a drone cope cage around it. That's showing you the challenge for the railways, for the trains, as much as for tanks and APCs and whatnot. Atesh have burned 2 pieces of occupier military equipment near Berdyansk. So that's good news. Not just a little relay box, successfully destroyed a fuel tanker and a UAZ. So a fuel tanker is going to be something that's in short supply, well, the fuel itself, and then another truck, a UAZ truck. Pictures aren't particularly clear there, but really good news to have sabotage happening very deep behind enemy lines and taking out important bits of equipment. This is doing the rounds at the moment. Absolutely staggering images coming out from Russian media in Smolensk. So apparently a truck ran a red light, I presume at level crossing, and a train hit the truck, and the train was carrying a lot of fuel. 18 train cars went off the rails, and this resulted. Absolutely incredible footage coming from there. The train driver and his assistant were injured and hospitalized. Train traffic on the section has been suspended, according to Moscow Railway. Now, this is, I mean, you can see from the images there, from the video here, this is a lot of fuel, yeah, but something that's in really short supply. We keep hearing how desperate the Russians are for fuel. And here, an entire train of fuel explodes in what looks like a genuine mistake. As in, this isn't, I presume it's not sabotage. In Smolensk region, a truck collided with a freight train at a railway crossing, causing 18 gasoline tankers to derail. A massive fire broke out as 12 of the cars were loaded with fuel, according to Moscow Railway. Wow. And there you can see it from another direction, 18 gasoline cars derailed. Yeah, that's going to hurt the Russians. And we'll talk a little bit more about fuel in actually next. I've got it lined up next. Who knew? There is an order to this. There's a method to my madness. But just look at that. That's incredible footage there. Okay, so now let's go on to this. First of all, I didn't play you this yesterday because I just thought, well, so what? But this was doing the rounds, okay? Due to a fuel shortage in temporarily occupied Crimea, there's an intensive movement of fuel trucks towards Simferopol. So this is yesterday, towards Simferopol and other major cities of Crimea. So someone driving along roads in Crimea is seeing a whole bunch of these fuel trucks going in convoy, effectively, to, I presume, different petrol stations in Crimea. Crimea has been desperately hit by the fuel shortage, right? And so this was a point of interest yesterday. Lots of people talking about this. I was like, okay, so what? Yeah, there's a fuel problem, and they're trying to desperately to fill these garages with a bunch of fuel. But I was wondering, I wonder if this is something they'd bother trying to hit, because we know that they can reach pretty much anywhere in Crimea with some pretty tasty drones. Lo and behold, today, do you remember that yesterday, the Russians were transporting gasoline to occupied Simferopol by fuel trucks? Well, the Ukrainians hit them. And here we have a burnt out fuel truck completely burnt out, two burnt out fuel trucks there next to a garage. The entire garage seems to be burnt out as well. It looks like the Ukrainians have indeed taken out these fuel trucks. Now, this is going to cause quite a lot of bother for the Russians, because they desperately need fuel in Crimea. It brings the economy to a halt. It stops, I assume it's going to have some effect on the military in some way. But that Ukrainians are bothering to take out individual tankers in, commercial tankers effectively in Crimea, I think is a significant move there. Another Russian official has been found dead in Moscow. Goodness me, they're dropping like flies. The body of Alexander Fedotov, the former chairman of St. Petersburg Committee for Transport Infrastructure, was found. Russians claim he committed suicide. He was discovered yesterday under the windows of the Sheraton Hotel at Sheremetyevo Airport. I don't know if he was trying to do a runner, maybe if he was going to the airport. Russian Windows 25. That is a meme. That is a meme. Goodness. So yes, found under a window. Another unfortunate defenestration example. Okay, let's move on to distant strikes. So 154 drones sent into Ukraine, of which 128 were taken out. That's an 83% interception rate, which is okay, I guess. But that, again, 26, we often see. So 26, 27 seems to be a really common number of drones getting through, irrespective of actually how many are sent in. Recorded at 9 locations. And then, of course, you got what goes up must come down. So a lot of the other drones will still be causing problems. Now, Kherson is massively being hit. Not so much by drones, though. The aerial bombs are absolutely hammering the city. It's just a real shame. Mainland Ukraine, it's been a horrendous morning for people in Kherson, even by their standards. Between 15 and 20 aerial bombs hit the city and region, one after the other, in a terrifying hour. An administrative building and numerous private houses are damaged. No more details yet. I would hope that, like we said about Zaporizhzhia, and we saw the Su-34 getting shot down, that they can move that Patriot or whatever shot down the Su-34 to. Some people are saying it could well have been an F-16. I didn't talk about that. It might have been an F-16. If it depends what the F-16 is firing. If it's using an AIM-120D, which is the most modern, I think, AIM-120, then that has a range of somewhere between maybe 130 and 160 kilometers, depending. But if it's not, then that, I think that puts and even with that, it puts the F-16 in quite a bit of risk. But of course, the air defense system would be at risk as well. If it's anything less than an AIM-120D, I think it would be too risky, because you have to bring the F-16 too close to the front line. But it could be that the Su-34 is taken out by an F-16. But yeah, anyway, Kherson subjected to a massive attack by Russians, 15 aerial bombs and artillery on the city centre. Just really horrific. I haven't heard too much about last night, though, other than Kherson, and that wasn't a case of drones. So often when drones are getting through, like 26 drones got through, and there's no footage of apartment blocks getting destroyed, that signifies to me that the Russians have probably hit some targets that they wanted to hit, that were military targets, military industrial targets. I think the silence there is probably bad news for the Ukrainians. Going back to yesterday, because this emerged, though, and it might happen that it emerges after I complete this video, that we find out what the Russians did hit. But yesterday we did find out after my video that Vinnytsia was significantly targeted. Part of the city was without power. Train service was suspended. As of 6 a.m. yesterday, power and train service had been restored, though. So they're very quick at fixing these things up. And then Chernihiv has been targeted an awful lot. Chernihiv here was struck yesterday. The enemy struck critical infrastructure facilities. Local residents reported hits and power outages in certain areas there. So Chernihiv, you had Vinnytsia, and then also Sumy, I believe, hit by Italmas drones. I've talked about them, but quite a long time ago. They were these kind of new... I don't know. I'll search them another time. I don't know if they were sort of similar to Lancets, but maybe a little bit bigger. Striking private business residential areas and near a municipal facility. The Russian terror continues to target civilians across Ukraine every hour of the day. I will do that now. It's our mass drone. Yeah, so explosive suicide drone. Here we go. So it's got a 40 kilogram warhead. So if you think a Lancer's going to have like a 4 kilogram warhead, and then you've got a Shahed of 90 kilogram. This is somewhere in the middle, obviously. It's a simple design with plywood fuselage and a plastic bottle as a fuel tank. It has a range of 200 kilometers and can carry a warhead of 40 kilograms. The engine can be bought off the shelf and they can be assembled at an aero modeling club. Really simple drone. Captured drones have also had a radar reflector. In October 2023, the first reported use took place. So that they were causing trouble in Sumy, just across the border. Right. Okay, but we don't know too much about what happened last night. Now, last night in Russia, we had another refinery hit. It's a refinery that's been hit previously, a Syrskyi refinery in, I think, the Krasnodar region, took a bit of a beating there. There are people who have worked out exactly what was hit, such as the primary oil refinery unit, the AT-22-4 was probably hit, says Zaporizhzhia, doing some geolocations there. It's located at the very beginning of the production chain. It's here that the crude oil is first separated, gases, gasoline, kerosene, diesel fractions, and a heavy residue is obtained. This is where it is. So it is, eastwards from the Kerch Bridge, carry on, and you get the Syrskyi. But it has been hit. It's been hit multiple times. But of course, the Ukrainians hit these refineries. The Russians do their best to get them up and running again within weeks, maybe a month, maybe a couple of months, whatever it is. And then the Ukrainians need to, like Sisyphus rolling that boulder back up the hill, they need to come around and do it again. And in fact, more like the Russians are Sisyphus, like fixing it back, and then as soon as you got it fixed, then the boulder rolls back down the hill. And Sisyphus then has to go back down the bottom of the hill, pick up that boulder and roll it back up, and then the Ukrainians push the boulder back down the hill. And so it goes on, and the Ukrainians are doing this, and it is working. It is grinding the Russians down. They are lacking in fuel across the country. Other places like Lipetsk is reporting fuel shortages today, so just more and more regions are adding to the long list. But yeah, so this is the Syrskyi oil refinery. Ukraine's drones were probing various places during the night. There were a number of places hit. We don't know any details outside of just a couple. Krasnodar region continues to be a good hunting ground in recent days, so they're definitely going for a lot of places around Krasnodar, around this region here, because it's relatively close. They've obviously been hitting Tuapse and Novorossiysk, as mentioned already. In fact, if we go down his list here, so we're going to talk about railway in a second. Problems for the Russians as well at Bryansk. There was a cleaning up to do at the Belaya Beryozka after a drone attack was repelled by Russia, as they claim. And maybe not, but anyway, I don't know what was struck there. There's also damage in Rostov and Taganrog overnight. As Russia says, it shot down 55 Ukrainian drones. He had stuff on that in his overnight thread. What's most intriguing now are unconfirmed reports from occupied Crimea. So there are missile strikes on FSB building in Armyansk, that's the northwest of Crimea. Strikes on Kirovskoye airfield and Vladislavivka, where there's a big railway junction, and then the Crimean bridge was closed for around 2 hours as 5 explosions hit Kursk as well, which is not, I don't know if he meant Kerch there or whether he means Kursk up on the northern border. Mainland Ukraine, horrendous morning for Kherson. So a number of places, particularly in Crimea, again, and my opinion would be that Crimea is going to be getting hit every single night. Whether you hear about it or not, there will be a lot more damage done to Russian stuff than we immediately know. Now, one other thing that was reported actually last night yesterday kind of afternoon my time, so this is early evening Kiev time. Big news: Robert Brovdy, commander of the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces Magyar, said that on the night of September the 25th, the 14th separate, so that would have been as it was happening or just after, the 14th separate regiment of the Ukrainian armed unmanned systems forces, carried out several successful strikes on gas distribution stations. So this originally, people were reporting that 4 gas stations were hit, and in the Luhansk region. I was like, okay, well, it's not that big, and why are they bothering to take out like little petrol stations? But actually, it's more, I think, more significant than that, possibly. Located in temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk. As a result of the drone flights, the following stations were successfully bombed: the Syrskyi in Luhansk region, the main gas source for the Luhansk thermal power plant. As a result of the attack, this thermal power plant had to switch to coal-fired mode. So the frustration I get as a British person, we say petrol for gasoline, right? And then we say gas for actual gas. But Americans say gas, short for gasoline, and then I presume gas for gas. And so there's a bit of equivocation there, or a bit of confusion. And that's really annoying. So it'd be really nice if everyone just said petrol. Thank you very much. So here, I presume this is actual gas, natural gas. Severodonetsk gas distribution station, critically important to the chemical industry. The Severodonetsk Azot and other facilities for gas supply. The Novopskov gas distribution station, again in Luhansk region. And then there are images of all of these, and all of these getting hit by Magyar's birds or whatever, whoever they are, the unmanned systems forces, wreaking havoc in the near rear there. That is obviously more success for the Ukrainians. So the SBU hit three key gas stations in Luhansk. All are in the occupied territory, said Robert Magyar. So 3 claimed there rather than 4. But anyway, a good result for the Ukrainians. Bryansk was definitely targeted. This is the Belaya Beryozka, where Tim White also showed a vehicle upside down and other bits and pieces. So you can see quite a lot of flashes. Not quite sure what's going on there. Looks like those are strikes on the ground. You can see some smoke coming up there, rather than air defense shooting it down. So evidently something was something was struck, I would have thought. Who knows? And who knows what was used as well? Whether it's missiles, someone suggesting ATACMS, who knows? Now, Russia's railways have been hit by a second blast this month. Trains in Pskov Oblast were forced to detour. The blast hit a section of the line between Luga and Pskov, used for both passenger and freight traffic. Don't know what was responsible for this. No report says an explosion, so whether it's sabotage or a strike, who knows, occurred early this morning on a railway line in Russia's Pskov region near Plyusa station. The regional governor confirmed the incident happened around 5 a.m. There were no casualties and no train derailments, while emergency services are currently working at the scene. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces we have here. We're going to start with this breaking news yesterday from Sky News.
Just getting some breaking news from the German defense minister. This is Boris Pistorius, saying that 2 Russian surveillance satellites are currently pursuing 2 Intelsat satellites used by German forces and others. Intelsat satellites used by German forces and others, the German defense minister says, are being pursued by Russian surveillance satellites. The use of the word pursued, I can't give you any more insight or intelligence as to what exactly Boris Pistorius is saying here. But the Reuters news agency then going on to say that he has made the comments that we must no longer ignore the fundamental threat that Russia poses in space. This is the German defense minister, and obviously we've seen this huge uptick in the number of satellites being deployed into space, both from militaries and also from people like SpaceX under Elon Musk, and it is getting a very crowded field up above us. But interesting, this line, like I say, 2 Russian Luck-Olymp surveillance satellites currently pursuing 2 Intelsat satellites used by German forces and others. This is coming from the German defence minister, and obviously this is all set against that backdrop of Russian incursions into Estonian airspace. There's 3 fighter jets that were there for 12 minutes, also the 19 drones and a single missile that entered Polish territory a couple of weeks ago. There's also these questions whether Russia denies any association with the situations over airports as well in Europe in the last few hours. But this now, the situation in space, we'll bring you more on that as we get it.
So, something else to worry about with regard to what Russia is up to. Pekka Kaliniemi here says now would be a really good time to wake up because Russia and its allies have launched an unprecedented attack against the EU and NATO. These attacks include sabotage, arson, murder plots, drones and fighter jets violating our airspace, and even attacks on our satellites in space. Wow. Now, Hungarian fighters yesterday, these were Gripen fighters, but Hungarian, so that's interesting, intercepted 5 Russian aircraft over the Baltic Sea. The Russian aircraft, including 3 MiG-31, a Su-30 and a Su-35, flew over the Baltic Sea near Latvian airspace. So they are really pushing the envelope. They're almost wanting NATO to take down a plane, I think. Lithuanian parliament has allowed the army to shoot down drones and other aerial targets that violate the country's airspace more quickly and easily. So that's a move in the Lithuanian parliament. We've got the Romanian Supreme Council of National Defence has just decided to give mission commanders the authority to down any military aircraft entering Romanian airspace, while the decision to down civilian aircrafts entering illegally will remain with the Minister of Defence. And then Mark Rutte has backed Trump's call to shoot down Russian aircraft that violate NATO airspace. So, it's all happening at the moment. Now, the Russian response, according to the Russian ambassador to France, Alexei Meshkov, it will be war if there is a downing of a Russian aircraft over a NATO country. So they are saber rattling and they're returning the ball across the net with their own threats there. Now, Denmark again closed Aalborg airports due to unidentified drones at night, according to TV2 there. It's a third case in recent times. The airspace was closed for an hour while police searched the area and nothing was found. But then we also hear a Russian warship has been spotted near the border of the Danish territorial waters. The Russian amphibious assault ship, says Max 25. Alexander Shabalin has been on duty in international waters 12 kilometres off the coast of Danish land of Langeland in recent days. I know I have some viewers from Langeland. It has turned off its transponder as well. So it's been standing on the border of international and Danish waters with the AIS signal turned off, making it impossible to track or detect at any ship bases. The ship is located between 70 and 270 kilometres from all airports and military facilities over which drones have been spotted in recent days. Local police confirm that they are considering the ship's presence near Danish territorial waters as evidence in the investigation into the drone incident. I would say incidents, as they keep happening. Okay, changing subject. For the second day, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is in blackout mode, forced to rely on diesel generators after losing external power. Energoatom says Russia is deliberately keeping it disconnected despite the power line on the Ukrainian side being fully operational. So there's a bit of nuclear power shenanigans. There's another. The southern nuclear power plant was also under threat of drones and shrapnel recently in the last 24 hours too. Something to worry about. Now, the Wall Street Journal reports that Ukraine battlefield briefings may have shifted Trump's view of Russia's war. US officials reportedly briefed Trump about current battlefield conditions and a planned Ukrainian offensive that would require American intelligence support. So it could be that, as I explained to you before, he started off that very not controversial, it's probably the wrong word, but incredibly revealing True Social post that showed an about face on pretty much everything to do with Ukraine. But he started with it saying, now that we fully understand X, Y, and Z, we're going to change our position. It was like, that's an admission that you didn't understand it previously. So this then fits in as a thesis with the idea that they were briefed by, US officials and Ukrainian battlefield briefings. They're actually getting proper information. They're like, oh yeah, okay, it's different. In fact, according to Zelensky, Trump wants Ukraine to win the war. That's a massive shift. Like, if that's true, like that is, he was never taught. He was asked directly who he wants to win the war. And he says, he's routinely just said, I want the killing to stop. And he refuses to answer that. So if he is actually saying, I want Ukraine to win the war, and that's kind of what was implied in his Truth Social post, then that's a big change. And he's also said, Trump, Putin is killing people for no reason whatsoever, which is a change because he was like, people are dying for no reason. But now he's doing that to Putin rather than, I think there must be an understanding that Ukrainians aren't dying for no reason. They're dying for their homeland, for their family, for their friends, for their livelihood, for everything. Russia's economy is going to hell. They're bombing the hell out of everything, and they're picking up very little territory. If any, in fact, they're losing some territory. So really revealing there from Trump. This war would have been over if this were our war. We would have had it over in 1 week. Okay, fairly typical there. And then the European Reconstruction Bank basically has joined the World Bank and Ukraine's central bank in slashing forecast. Growth for 2025 will be just 2 to 2.5%. So it's still growing, but not what it needs to, considering it's coming from a very poor place of being hammered, the Ukrainian economy. The problem is structural, labour, energy, exports, and it points to one conclusion. Without security, there's no path for higher growth. They need security, and the West, and particularly the US, are key to that. Anyway, that's enough from me. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for it, and take care, and I will speak to you soon. Toodle pips.